how to manage people when they have acute illnesses while they're under constitutional treatment. And this is a topic that I think was dealt with more thoroughly by George Vathulkas than probably anybody's ever thought of dealing with this. And when I was living in Greece, so in about 83 or 84, something like that, he and I wrote this material together, which I'm going to edit just slightly because I think that our newer understandings have improved on to a certain extent, but the basic material stayed the same all during this time period. And we presented this as a paper together at the International Liga in Washington. I think it was 83 or 84. The first thing that we need to talk about in this lecture is what is an acute state. This is different than what we've talked about before, the acute miasm, right? Related, but just an acute. What is an acute? What is an acute illness? It's usually started with what? A prodromal phase, yeah? And then it goes into an acute illness that is usually often characterized by fever and acute symptomatology. It lasts a prescribed period of time and then it goes away by itself. Now, many acute illnesses, what would have been considered acute illnesses 50 or 100 years ago, we don't know exactly whether or not the patient has an acute illness now, because what happens? They get antibiotic treatment, and we don't know whether or not this would have been an acute or would have been part of a chronic constitutional symptom that developed, or whether they would have gone on to recovery or died. We don't know exactly what the course of illnesses are now. What happens with a strep throat if it's left untreated? We hardly ever see such cases nowadays. So it's a little bit, we don't know the natural history of disease the way that our homeopathic ancestors knew them. However, now there's another group of illnesses that look as though they're acute, but they're not really. That means that they come on suddenly. They may even come on with a prodrome. They may last a short period of time and get over or kill the patient, but they're not acutes. These include things like epilepsy, migraine headaches, hay fever, hay asthma, conditions that start acutely. They last a certain period of time. They may kill the patient, like epilepsy or asthma, or the patient may get over it. Now, what's the difference? It's simply part of a recurring constitutional state that has nothing to do with an acute miasm. That means there's no infective source. So we're not talking about those conditions at all right now. We're just talking about true acutes. Now, there's one other group that's sort of in a gray zone, and that is people that, as their main characteristic of their constitutional problem, they get recurring acute illnesses, right? Women who get recurring bladder infections, children with recurring otitis media. I want to divide patients into basically three different categories. In response to, or potential response to homeopathic treatment, or non-response to constitutional homeopathic treatment, okay? So group A is people, these are our normal patients that we see. They come in with relatively moderate chronic disease state. That means they have arthritis, migraines, minor anxiety or depressive disorders, just our usual patients that come in. Now, the majority of these patients suffer from relatively frequent acute illness. Not all, but as a rule. People that are moderately sick have a lot of acutes, or they get acutes frequently. or at least they get Acute's average, which would be 2 to 3 times a year or more frequently.
The history of potency selection and thoughts about it, the philosophy associated with those thoughts and recommendations, also some very practical tips that involve potency and in general, and some issues of case management and thoughts about disease. The range of potencies that we're going to cover will, as you can see in your handout, are the decimal, centesimal, and LM potencies. Decimal potencies are referred to with the initial either D or X, and either the mother tincture or the original trituration, if it's a solid substance, is diluted 1 to 10 and succussed 10 times at each level. So the common decimal potencies are 6x and 30x. And there's also 12 and 24. At 24 and below, these are material dilutions. That's less than Avogadro's number, meaning there's still a molecule of the substance present. And you see primarily this potency used in ways that not in your hands as a prescriber. Cell salts are usually in this range of potencies. The centesimal potencies have a number of ways to refer to them. C, the common one, CH, and CK. Then, of course, at high dilutions, C turns into M. Actually, 1,000 C, of course, turns into M. And in terms of being material or herbal, 6C will still contain a molecule of the substance, and 12C and above will not. The dilution is 1 to 100 at each level, at each step, and the number of succussions remains at 10. It's very important to remember that it's not just a dilution, but a dynamization, an activation, a potentiation. All those are the words that apply to the process of succussion. So CH is used when a pharmacy wants to particularly indicate that the remedy is actually made by a dilute and shake method as described by Hahnemann in the Organon. And it's more frequently used by European pharmacies. The Quinn pharmacy here uses C when in fact they are doing things by the Hahnemannian method, but it's just simply written as C. 6C, 12C, 30C. So you'll see CK used, again really more from other pharmacies, for dilutions of 30 and beyond to indicate that the remedy was made by the Korsakoff method. It was developed for simplification in 1828. And there's a couple of differences. In the Hahnemannian method, the one bottle, you want to take one drop out of this bottle to dilute 1 to 100, and it's put into a fresh bottle in traditional Hahnemannian dilutions. In Korsakoff, it's done by dumping out all but 1 drop and adding 99 drops to that. And actually, I believe that's how Michael Quinn does it past a certain point, that he also dumps and adds. But I believe at low potency, he changes bottles. And I'm not sure about that. You can ask him about that. And it's also, in the Korsakoffian method, it's not a succussion, but an agitation. So if you see a 200 CK potency, it's considered interchangeable, but you know actually that it wasn't made by the succussion method. M potencies, you understand it's used in a place of 1,000 C, 1,000 C shortened to an M just to make it easier to designate very high potencies. And the high potencies that are typically available are 1M, 10M, 50M, CM, and MM. And there's other potencies available. DM is sometimes available, which is a 500M. And then you can really have any potency made up, and you might have reason to do so. A 10M plus 1 you can have made up. a 10M plus 1C. So he makes a 10M and dilutes it one more time. Michael will do that. And they will make up any potency that you ask Quinn Pharmacy to make up, and you just have to pay for the amount of time it takes on his machine. And other pharmacies like Helios already have them made up to 50M and CM and MM. They already go higher. So LM potencies are different. They start with a 3C potency. And each subsequent dilution is 1 to 50,000. And the number of succussions goes up to 100. And each LM level is used. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it goes up to typically a level of 30. Historically, let's think about potency to put us in the proper situation where we can make choices. Hahnemann began his first work using material substances and didn't start potentizing until about 5 years into his work. And then we talked about subsequent methods developed, the Korsakoff method and the Skinner machine. But in the history of homeopathy, many of our greatest prescribers worked with only the 5th edition of the Organon. The 5th edition of the Organon has nothing of Hahnemann's latest work and nothing about LM potencies. So Kent and Lippi and Benninghausen and lots of homeopaths who are inspirational, have wonderful handfuls of hundreds of cured cases, used only C potencies.